He began to moan during the night between Friday and Saturday. At first, it was a low, hoarse sound, as if someone were rubbing a damp cloth across marble. By morning, the moaning had turned into a wheeze, by noon into a scream, and by evening into an incoherent plea. The servants looked at each other, but no one dared to enter. The king's bedroom was locked from the inside, not by a lock, but by the dying man himself. He forbade anyone to touch his body. According to the captain of the guard's report, the rooms were filled with the smell of rotten meat on the third day, when the door was still locked. The key was kept by the valet, but he had disappeared. He was later found dead in the river, his cheekbone cut open and worms in his eye socket. The king was 64. He had ruled for 30 years and survived 3 conspiracies, 2 epidemics, and 1 daughter burned at the stake for heresy. In his final months, his face turned gray, his breath smelled of honey and pus, and his tongue swelled so much that he could no longer speak in complete sentences. According to the cook, he looked at meat as if it were his enemy, but asked for more salt. He drank only water with opium, tore off his fingernails, and ate his own mucus. The rooms on the 3rd floor of the palace were draped with clothes soaked in vinegars. This was not an aesthetic measure. The walls exuded a stench that made the soldiers vomit in the corridors. Servants were ordered to hang bags of ashes and rosemary, but the air remained thick as tar. On the 7th day, the doors were opened by order of the crown prince. From that moment on, all conversations were whispered. The bishop's report states, "We entered the room, and our feet began to stick to the floor. The sheets were black with blood, and the bed was stuck to the sovereign's skin. He did not recognize anyone. His eyes were cloudy and glassy. There was a hole in his cheek from which maggots were emerging. His chest did not breathe, but shook as if someone were wriggling beneath it. The doctors refused to enter. The official version was that they feared contagious fever. The real reason was fear of punishment. The last doctor, summoned by order of the regent, was found in the stables with his skull cracked open. His face had been burned with lime. The bailiffs carried the body to a clean bed and wiped it with rags soaked in wine. This caused the king to scream. He screamed as if he were being boiled. Dark pus oozed from his navel, and a liquid with the smell of rotten cabbage dripped from his armpits. According to reports, one of the guards fainted and died 2 days later from suffocation. On the 8th day, the prince-bishop ordered a ceremony of absolution to be performed. The king was unable to confess. His tongue was white, covered with cracks and swelling. The priest who approached the bed felt heat bursting from the sovereign's mouth as if from a furnace. He dropped the cross and ran away. Rumors of what was happening began to spread throughout the city. Women began to pray in the square, and bells rang in the monasteries. The poor claimed to have seen birds without eyes flying over the palace. Merchants closed their shops, and children stopped being born. One chronicler wrote, "The king is rotting alive. His flesh does not await death, it precedes it." The prince, wishing to hasten his death, ordered that a potion made from belladonna root and mercury be added to his wine. But the king vomited the contents of his stomach onto his bed. Then they stopped feeding him. They only gave him boiled water with opium. This caused him to moan continuously, convulse, and once he bit off his own lip. The flesh remained hanging from his chin, blackened and hardened like stone. The floor in the chambers had not been washed for 3 days. Lice and flies became part of the decor. On Friday, a palace rat gnawed its way to the bed and climbed onto the king's chest. He did not notice. He stared at the ceiling and whispered, "No forgiveness. No, no." The palace was deserted. Only 2 servants remained on duty by order of the heir, and both subsequently went blind, allegedly, from the stench and sin. From a secret letter from the administrator, he is no longer a man. He is a rotting creature that emits a smell that tears at the guts. His flesh is not covered with sores. It has become a sore itself. His will died before his body. We are afraid of him. He is still alive. From the testimony of Etienne Doulange, senior page. On the third day, I could still hear him calling my name. He couldn't see me, didn't know where he was, but he called. The room was filled with a thick smell of mold, vinegar, and old blood. Liquid was pooling under the sheets. I could see it seeping through the fabric, and there were marks on the floor under the bed that looked like black algae. I didn't go any closer. The palace was silent. The doors to the sovereign's chambers were closed, and only a few trusted bodyguards were allowed to enter. Servants, who had been ordered to stand guard outside, carried water, blankets, and rare herbal decoctions through a screen. The doctors, who had been summoned urgently, left the court with their heads bowed. One of them, old Geoffroy of Montpellier, left a written statement in the city cathedral that same evening. What I saw defies medical understanding. The body, barely covered with flesh, moved, but it was not the movement of a living being. It was a mass of stinking death that only pretended to be human. His lips were swollen and covered with a wax-like crust. On his back, I noticed dark holes, possibly the beginnings of gangrenous abscesses. I advised not to let the blood out. He would die on the spot. He did not speak. He moaned, and these moans echoed in my temples, so that it seemed to me that Satan was praying in them. The sovereign's condition became more terrible with each passing day. The skin on his sides was covered with a sticky film, which was removed daily with a knife, but within a few hours it would return. Pockets of rot appeared in the folds of his skin, first in the groin and armpits, then all over his stomach. The servant said that the king was gurgling like a pot of beans. His belly swelled and became round like an inflated leather bag. One of the cooks, who heard the sounds coming from the chambers, swore that he heard a splashing sound, as if a barrel of sour wine had been opened in the room. Rumors spread faster than the tumors on the monarch's body. It was said that he had been cursed for killing a shepherd, that he had eaten the flesh of a baby, that he had played chess with the devil. Priests demanded to be let in, but the palace guards refused. The archbishop sent 2 notes demanding confession, but no one answered. The 5th day began with 3 women, a wet nurse, a maid, and one of the senior ladies in waiting. Leaving the palace in a panic, they claimed that the king was half dead, that his mouth would not close, and that blood was flowing from his nose like dark slime. According to one of them, he was staring at the ceiling, but he wasn't blinking. His eyes were like a fish's, gray, wet, and glassy. His tongue had swollen so much that it looked like it might burst. There were cracks on his forehead, like on a cracked tree, and in his groin I saw something like black foam. I don't know how to describe it. He's not human. On the 7th day, the Bishop of Turin entered the room. He was accompanied by 2 monks and a doctor. They stayed inside for less than a quarter of an hour. When he came out, the bishop said nothing, but ordered the windows in the chapel to be closed and a 40-day prayer for forgiveness to begin. He refused to consecrate the chambers and said that the king's soul could no longer be purified. According to him, inside there is only flesh and not a drop of spirit. Ulcers began to appear on the sovereign's body. The first appeared on his neck, then at the base of his spine. They gave off a foul odor, and no one dared to clean them except for 2 Bedouins who had been specially hired for gold. They did not speak the local language, did not ask questions, and did not cross themselves. They were only told to clean and not look into the king's eyes. One of them ran away on the 3rd day. The second died of fever a day after leaving the palace. When the king finally began to speak, no one understood his words. He whispered, coughed, and sometimes screamed, suddenly, sharply, as if in pain, although no one touched him. One of his courtiers wrote, "His voice sounds like the creaking of torn cloth. Steam escapes from his mouth, even though the room is cold. He licks his lips, but cannot close his mouth. He calls out to someone, his mother, perhaps, or death. All this time, no one knew who was ruling the kingdom. The council did not meet. The chancellor did not appear before the people. Some counts had already begun to leave for the provinces, preparing for a power vacuum. Soldiers stood at the doors, but every day the guard thinned. The guards fell ill, covered with spots. One died right at the gate. The people outside the palace whispered about the king's plague. On the 11th day, the stench became so bad that the entire south wing was evacuated. They said that even the rats had left the dungeons, and the dogs howled at night. The last 3 who remained with the monarch were silent. The pages had disappeared. The windows were boarded up. A black veil was hung on the door. Officially, it was mourning for the deceased Queen Mother. In reality, it was so that no one could see the thick ochre-colored liquid seeping from under the door. On the 13th day, he fell silent. He did not shout or whisper. He only wheezed, sometimes for several minutes at a time. One of the servants claimed to hear something flapping in the monarch's chest, as if a sparrow were beating against a sack. His heart was beating, but unevenly, as if it were stopping. His body temperature dropped, although his forehead was hot. No doctor entered. They did not even approach him. The guards sat with their faces covered with cloth. One of them, an elderly veteran, cried all night. The next morning, he was found hanged in the stable. No one saw the king again. Only the smell remained. It didn't just smell like death. The chambers reeked of raw meat, a closed grave, and inhuman fear. The guards were no longer standing at the doors. They had been called away by the valet so as not to provoke vomiting among the servants who were relieving the night watch. Everyone who was supposed to look after the sovereign had either fled or pretended to be deaf. One of the footmen, a young man with a red face and trembling hands, jumped out of the kitchen window when he was called to bring vinegar and wine to the bedroom. The report stated, "The sovereign is conscious, but frightens everyone with his moans, gasps, and cries, which are not meant for human ears." He was not dying. He was disintegrating slowly, as if his flesh itself was protesting against his spirit. His lips were cracked, his tongue thickened and darkened, as if it had been scalded. A sticky brown coating oozed from his mouth, giving off the smell of rotten blood and rancid fat. On the 3rd day, wet sounds began to be heard from under the sheets, as if someone were stirring water with intestines. The court physician refused to enter. "If I open my mouth in these chambers, I will die myself." Dr. de Renier, who had been brought from a monastery 100 miles away, stood silently at the entrance and refused to go inside until he was given an amulet and 2 flasks of diluted wine to hold to his nose. His description is included in the council's chronicles. "I saw the skin on his stomach peeling off in layers, like wet parchment. Not a single ulcer was healing. Pus was oozing from under his fingernails, and his fingers had turned black. He was not simply ill. His body was rotting away while he was still able to see and breathe." On the 4th day, the monarch fell into a stupor. His eyes rolled back, and one pupil stopped moving. The priests offered purification spells, but after one of them fainted from the stench and fell into a fever, the rituals ceased. The room was entered only with rags over their faces and burning lamps. A vat of charcoal was placed near the bed to somehow mask the stench. The archbishop, summoned to hear confessions, did not enter. He sent his disciple, a young cleric with trembling knees, who was ordered to say prayers of repentance through a crack in the door. The archbishop himself signed a report. "If the spirit of the sovereign has not yet left his body, then he is imprisoned in hell while still alive." Meanwhile, panic broke out outside the palace. The people did not know whether the monarch was alive. The markets were deserted. Soldiers stood silently at the gates, and a struggle for the throne began in the crypts. One of the cousins, the late queen's younger brother, gathered a secret council in the abbey, where 3 nobles and 2 notaries had made their way. They discussed if the monarch died while the heir was in exile, who would get the seal. No one knew how much longer he would last. On the 6th day, his skin turned blue and porous, like a corpse in water. A thick yellow liquid flowed from his ears. Juan's servant wrote, "He screamed so loudly that my heart sank into my heels. Something moved in his stomach, like a worm in a sack. I cannot explain it any other way. I ran away, leaving the candle behind." That same evening, the fire spread to the curtains. They did not extinguish it, but simply closed the door. From the medical report, compiled under pressure from the council, his condition is deteriorating. Signs of gangrene in the groin. The upper limbs are losing sensation. Organs are failing one by one. The heart is probably still beating, but intermittently. A palm-sized ulcer has appeared on the neck, with dead tissue underneath. When he was heard again, he was moaning, quietly, as if underground. The servants whispered, "He is already in hell, and his cries reach us through the walls." On the 8th day, the ambassadors from the northern kingdom requested an audience. They were refused. The next day, they left the palace and went to the fortress of the Earl of Moray. They expected the worst. The second physician, an old master of herbs, sent a servant with a note. "I will not enter. I am not a corpse maker. I am a healer. Let them come for me when he stops breathing." He was breathing, intermittently, with wheezing, sounds like vomiting. The sheets were soaked with fluids. The floor was covered with slime and pus. Insects crawled out from under the bed. The court chroniclers no longer recorded the exact dates. They simply wrote, "Day 11, the sovereign is rotting." And still, no doctor entered the bedroom. The monarch's death was not officially announced for another 2 days. During this time, the body continued to ooze even in the lead coffin. A dark, viscous liquid flowed from a tiny crack at the bottom edge. The soldiers standing guard at the crypt complained of a smell, as if someone had boiled entrails in vinegars. One of them described in a report, "It seems that it is not the body that has gone into the ground, but a curse." Panic broke out in the council. Those who yesterday called the sovereign the chosen one now demanded that his remains be burned. The archbishop forbade it. In response, they slipped a piece of cloth with the imprint of a rotten foot under his door. It had fingernails on it, already blackened and disintegrating. Archival documents show that several priests secretly left for the nearest monastery and refused to return, even under threat of excommunication. From the report of the guardsman Jean Lecroix, there were noises all night long, rustling, scraping. I was sure it was rats. But in the morning, we discovered that the lead coffin was covered with dents on the inside. As if someone was fighting from inside, I didn't believe it. But another guard started a fight hysterically, shouting that the body was moving. They took him away. Later, he died of suffocation in his sleep. They said he died screaming. On the 4th day after his death, there was no one left in the castle who had seen the deceased alive. His portraits were taken down. The seals were melted down. All the documents from the last few years were burned. The council gathered in a closed hall and spent 3 days discussing who to proclaim as his successor. An open conflict broke out between the cousin and the son of the deceased mistress. One of them was found dead, strangled by his own cloak. Officially, it was ruled a suicide. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread throughout the country. Some said that the monarch had been poisoned. Others said he had been struck by a curse for his sins. One monk claimed that a demon had taken up residence in his chambers and could not be exorcised. In peasant villages, people began burning herbs and sprinkling goat's blood on their doors. They feared that the king's decay was a harbinger of the plague. From a letter from the apothecary of the city of Tournai, when the first messengers arrived, they said that it was not a man who had died in the castle, but the very flesh of the state. They said that steam was coming out of his tomb at night, and that the herbs planted nearby had withered in a day. I don't believe everything, but all my anti-decay potions sold out in a week. People wear them as amulets. On the 7th day after his death, riots broke out. In 2 cities, the inns where the nobility lived were ransacked. People shouted, "Burn the heirs! Burn the doctors!" The crowd demanded that the body be handed over to prove that the monarch was dead. One of the senior officers resorted to a trick. He threw a piece of the king's fabric, soaked in rot, into the well. This temporarily calmed the people, but did not solve anything. At the same time, a strange epidemic began. First among the servants who washed the floors in the deceased's chambers, then among the cooks and laundresses. The symptoms were the same: foul-smelling sweat, ulcers on the legs, blackness in the corners of the mouth, and clouding of the eyes. 5 people died in 2 days. The bodies were not buried. They were burned along with their clothes. The doctors did not know the cause. One of them wrote that it was not a disease, but death itself, absorbed into the air. From a later medical treatise, we assume that the decay of the body, which occurred during life, and was not stopped by embalming, became the source of a special cadaverous vapor. It penetrated the stone, the curtains, the breath. This vapor was heavy, sticky, saturated with spores, bacteria, and horror. It infected not the flesh, but the mind, and therefore the epidemic was accompanied not so much by pain as by fear. On the 10th day, the castle was deserted. The heirs fled. The council fell apart. The body was left untouched. It was left in the basement. Crosses were placed at the tomb. Candles were lit at night, and 3 monks read psalms without ceasing. According to legend, one of them went blind, another died, the third disappeared. 2 weeks after the monarch's death, anarchy swept the country. In the north, an impostor appeared, claiming to be the reincarnated sovereign who had survived and changed. His followers burned city clerks who did not recognize his decrees. In the south, a new dynasty was proclaimed, and in the center, the army seized power for the first time in history. From a secret report by a church agent, the people are not mourning. They say that the decay of the body was a sign that the flesh that rotted during his lifetime was a punishment from above. The monarch, whose death brought unrest to the land, is no longer holy. He has become a symbol of sin, and now anyone who touches his name is rejected by heaven. A month after his death, the body was secretly exhumed. They said to hide it far away from people. But when they opened the coffin, there were no remains inside. Only slime, charred shreds, and a faint smell of vinegar remained. Some said that the body had disappeared. Others said that rats had eaten it. But no one looked for it anymore. They stopped writing about him. He was not mentioned in the chronicles. His portraits were burned. His name was crossed out of prayers. And only in one document, kept in a monastery in the north, is there a line that reads, "Cursed monarch. His body rotted faster than his will was written, and so he died, not by the hand of an enemy, but from the rot that had grown in him since childhood."